All right, folks. Well, we will go ahead and get started. I want to first start off by saying thank you for joining today's webinar, Solar Policy in Motion, the Impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill. And before we go too much further, I'll just go ahead and apologize if at any time today I have to pause for a moment to cough. I've been had a cold over the last couple of days and just have a bit of a lingering cough after I'm feeling better. So if you could bear with me, and I know my friend here, Matt, is going to be a huge help as he's going to do some of the speaking today. But yeah, let's jump right into it. Okay, so for starters here, we're looking at the agenda just to kind of set the stage. In a moment, I'll introduce Cape Fear Solar Systems, and then pass it over to Matt here to introduce himself and the organization he's a part of, NCSEA. We'll then speak to the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Now Act. We'll also talk about the history of the cost of solar, the future of electricity demand, and the expected cost increase there. And then we'll speak to other incentives that may still be available, and ultimately what it means for solar for those of you who are investigating a project or would like to in the future. And then finally, we'll finish it off with some Q&A with Matt here. And of course, I'll be available for any questions as well. So cool. Jumping on over to speak a little bit more about who we are here at Cape Fear Solar Systems. I see many names that I'm familiar with. So if you're already a part of our community, thank you. If you've heard this before, bear with me here. But for those of you who are new to who Cape Fear Solar Systems is, we've been in business now since 2007. During that time, we've installed over 4,500 installations, and we're headquartered right here out of Wilmington, North Carolina, and operate within about a 3-hour radius, installing residential, commercial, solar, battery, and EV charging solutions. We are, of course, BBB accredited, and we think our reviews and reputation stand for themselves. And lastly, we're community focused, really just meaning that we are the local experts in your utility, your jurisdiction, the processes for permitting and approval, and making sure that we're not just installing a solar system, but we're doing it in the best possible way here in our region for your home. All right. And now I'll pass it back over to Matt to introduce himself. And I want to say thank you again, Matt, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe, and thanks for inviting NCSEA to be here and to be a part of the webinar to talk about a lot of the policy changes that have taken place over the course of the past just 2 months in 2025, and a lot of these have direct impacts on the technologies that we'll be talking about here today. So it's really important and timely that we're having the conversation. And just as a little bit of background. I am Matt Abele. I'm the executive director of the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association. We are a nonprofit that advocates for and represents energy businesses across the state and customers as well at places like the North Carolina General Assembly and at the North Carolina Utilities Commission. And so we've got now more than 200 members that consist of clean energy companies, universities, local governments, nonprofits. And I've been in this space for just more than a decade now at a variety of different clean energy for-profits and nonprofits, mostly working on policy. Much of that we'll talk about here in just a minute. So with that, Gabe, I think we can go over to the next slide. So I think the elephant in the room, right, is talking about the reconciliation bill, or the One Big Beautiful Bill. And I know Gabe will be diving into more of the details on this here in just a minute. But for those that have been tracking, or maybe for those that haven't been tracking, a little bit earlier this summer, as part of the reconciliation package that Congress moves forward every so often. Primary focus of this year's package was energy, in which clean energy tax credits were the subject of a lot of discussion and were on the chopping block. And so prior to the reconciliation bill, or the One Big Beautiful Bill this year, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law in 2022, had extended a lot of the tax credits, both for large projects, utility scale projects, all the way down to residential projects through about 2032. That all changed once this bill passed and was signed into law on July 4th. And specific to the conversation here today is the provision or the tax credit, the 25D, the residential clean energy tax credit, which is directly applicable to residential solar and battery storage. But if folks are interested in talking about some of the other tax credits for things like commercial projects like 48E, happy to help answer any questions about those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A section. But essentially, under the reconciliation bill, we saw a phase out of the 25D residential clean energy tax credit on a significantly expedited timeline versus that 2032 timeline that I was talking about earlier, to now being phased out at the end of 2025. In statute, the language specifically says, the project must have expenditures made by December 31st of 2025 of this year, right? So we've gotten a lot of questions about this specific language. I know Gabe and the Cape Fear team have gotten a lot of questions about what this means for somebody who is interested in installing solar at their home. And just at a high level, because as folks are considering installing solar, and if you're talking to any solar installer, it's really important that there's clarity around what this date mean and what this terminology means. And essentially, the idea is with expenditures made as directed by some treasury language that has been developed, is a project or a solar system must be installed on a roof and basically ready to go. You don't necessarily have to have permission to operate from the utility, but the equipment must be installed and be there and essentially ready to turn on. Despite what the language here might say, expenditures made, where you might think, oh, I just have had to sign a contract, right, and paid a deposit on it. That is, in fact, not the case. And therefore, you'll hear from Gabe in just a minute about sort of the urgency around getting under contract to make sure that you're staying within the timeline of the capacity that they have available prior to the end of the year to make sure that you're complying with those with that expenditure made language and deadline. But nonetheless, I think one of the points that we wanted to make here on the webinar today, right, is even if you aren't installing prior to the end of this year, solar is still a great choice and is still economically a great decision, especially when you compare it to the cost of a lot of the technology and how much it's come down over the past 10 to 15 years. And we'll get into that here in just a little bit. So with that, Gabe, I'll pass it back over to you to provide a little bit more background on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Yeah, isn't that a mouthful? Well, cool. Thanks for that, Matt. And I appreciate you touching on that expenditures made language. I mean, I think that's just a prime example of how confusing all of this can be at times. I mean, I remember when the act finally got put into law, and people across the industry see that language and it's fairly ambiguous. It's kind of unclear. And there were a lot of people who are optimistic. Does this mean that people can sign up and just pay for the system by the end of the year and they'll be good to go? And obviously that's not the case. But I think it's important that that's highlighted as an example of why it's valuable to talk to and lean on local installers who are really diving into this type of language and making sure that it's being represented properly and that you're set up for success with the system that you choose to install. So to go a little bit deeper and just add some additional color to what Matt said, I think that for the most part covers it. Most specifically, this was signed into law on July 4th. So a big part of President Trump's second term agenda. And the key provisions that Matt spoke to are, 25D, that having been 30% of the cost that was eligible to be claimed. And again, those projects have to be completed by December 31st. Under the commercial credit, so that 48E, again, 30%. That has a little bit longer runway with some kind of added contingencies around what they would call safe harboring. which has to do with when a project begins and kind of holding some eligibility there as long as it's begun that by that time. So again, that's an area that just kind of requires a little bit of diving into on the commercial project side. And then lastly, sort of foreign entities of concern was introduced as a provision that's really aimed to limit the access to the tax credits for projects that involve or are influenced by certain foreign entities. So specifically looking at materials made in areas that they're concerned about. And I think that's an interesting note because while it doesn't pertain to residential projects, and it's looking at these commercial projects eligible for the credit over this shortened sunset. That's an area that we've already been pretty concerned about, is making sure that we're using material that are coming from areas that we can feel good about where it's coming from. A lot of the materials we're using are coming right here from the US and more specifically the Southeast, with modules that are being manufactured in many cases in Georgia and South Carolina with microinverters in that region as well. So that's an area that I think will continue to be a focus, even without these tax credits going forward. And I know we've spoken already, and Matt was on a webinar with us before talking about some of the domestic manufacturing developments even in our state. So still excited about those things moving forward. And I'll pass it back to you, Matt, to speak to just what you alluded to, decreasing cost of solar.
That's right. Yeah, and to pick back up on that thread, right, is when you look at the overall cost of solar over the past 15 years, I think it's so important to point out how much costs have dropped. And specifically, I know this chart's a little bit of an eyesore, but this comes from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and this is basically charting out year over year the cost of residential solar. And what you'll see is, dating back to around 2010, residential solar on average costs, $8.50 a watt. And you see that now drop pretty significantly depending on the installer and your project, and a lot of other variables around it, right? You're looking at, sub $3 a watt installed for a residential solar project moving forward. And so, in essence, you're looking at a cost decrease of more than 68% of the technology since 2010. And that it's pretty unprecedented when you compare that to a lot of other products or services that you might get, especially in an era of significant inflation, right? Over the past couple of years. And so part of the reason why I think it's important to provide this context, and maybe before I get to this point, let's go to the next slide, Gabe, so I can also talk about how this mirrors the exact same trends that we're seeing in the battery space. So, we're seeing many residential customers across the state of North Carolina elect to install batteries along with solar due to programs like Power Pair, which we'll get to in just a minute. And so with the battery storage that is being installed with those systems, the cost of that technology has also substantially decreased over the past 15 years. And so what you're looking at in a chart here is a cost per kilowatt hour of installed battery storage moving forwards from dating back to 2010. And so when you look at 2010, battery costs at that time were just shy of $1,500 a kilowatt hour, now dropping all the way down to, in 2024, just north of $100 a kilowatt hour installed. So battery costs have decreased by more than 92% since 2010. So very similar trends that we are seeing in the solar space and storage spaces. And why do I illustrate that point, right? Is, there's a lot of conversation right now around the loss of the investment tax credit, at the end of this year for residential projects, especially. But I think it's really important contextually to think about the costs of these projects now compared to where they were 10 or 15 years ago. Even without the investment tax credit, installed costs for residential projects and commercial projects are still significantly less today than they were, 15 years ago. And so, I think post end of 2025, as you make it into 2026, if you're not able to install in time, because you're still weighing whether you would like to move forward with installation, the loss of the tax credit at the end of this year should not be a barrier to moving forward with installation. Solar is significantly cheaper than it was previously, and it's also a great way to mitigate against risk associated with rising electricity rates. And I think that leads me into my next point, which is on the next slide, about where we are going overall with electricity rates across North Carolina. So going back to the bill that we started the conversation with, the one big beautiful bill, there has been a series of analyses that have been produced since then to talk about what that bill's impacts will be on electricity rates across North Carolina. And in particular, here I'm citing a study from a group called Energy Innovation, which is projecting that bill to lead to about an 18% increase in electricity rates in the state over the next 10 to 15 years. Additionally, aside from those forward-looking projections, looking backwards, we've already been subject to some pretty significant rate increases here in North Carolina that have been approved by the North Carolina Utilities Commission in Duke Energy Progress territory, in which I'm assuming a number of folks tuning in fall within. And that's, between 23, 24, and 25, just north of 13% rate increases over the past 3 years alone. Some of the highest rate increases of any utility across the country over the past year and a half, 2 years, and I know folks are feeling it. And that's a trend that we are expecting to see more of moving forward. We also just recently here in North Carolina saw the passage of Senate Bill 266, which will lead to an additional $23 billion in costs for ratepayers through 2050 in North Carolina. And then, add that to some of the other pressures that we're seeing on our electricity grid here in the state, specifically pertaining to new large load customers coming into the state. So you're talking about manufacturing and data centers. You think about all of the new fun tools that you have on your phone to create cat images like ChatGPT and Google and Grok and all of that, right? Those are very, very energy intensive. And we're now starting to see widespread proliferation of the data centers to power those applications. And unfortunately, those data centers also consume a whole heck of a lot of electricity. And to help provide some context here, a data center that was announced more recently here in North Carolina, just one data center alone, has enough energy demand that is equivalent to the amount of capacity available through a Sharon Harris nuclear facility that is operating here in the Triangle area where I am from. So it helps provide context as to how much energy demand is coming online just from one customer. We're talking about a whole nuclear facility. So lots and lots of new electricity demand, and even further context around this, all of that demand by 2035, I believe is the date, is the equivalent amount of electricity to power 5 small states here in the US. So regardless of the technology, whether it be new nuclear, new natural gas, new large scale solar, all of those things cost money. And when the utility has to spend a lot of money to bring on new electricity generation, that gets passed along to you as the ratepayer. Unfortunately, I was just sharing this with somebody yesterday, right? The free ride for all of these really fun AI software tools that you use on your phone is coming to an end very quickly. You have those pressures along with some of the other pressures that I talked about previously that will likely continue that trend that we have seen over the past couple of years of continued rate increases. And so, as Gabe, had alluded to or will allude to, right? On-site generation is a great way to control your own utility bills in the future and mitigate against that risk of rising electricity rates. So next slide.
Matt, if you don't mind me adding just a little bit of color here,
Please. Yeah,
one
go
of
ahead.
the things that I thought was just so interesting looking at the graph for the just decrease in the cost of residential solar. I mean, I do want to kind of like frame this in the context that people understand. I know price per watt can sometimes be, well, what's that exactly mean? Well, I know that some of you have solar systems already. One of the easy ways for us to measure how big a system is just by the potential power output of that system, and that would be in kW or in watts. A pretty common system size is 10 kW or 10,000 watts. And so what this really is communicating is that a 10,000 watt system now would on average cost about $27,000. Whereas a 10,000 watt system in 2010, which nobody was installing because they couldn't afford it, was an $86,000 system. Those people at that time were much more likely to be spending the same amount of money, 27 to $30,000 for, a quarter of the system. That was what was more common is we would see systems around 3, maybe 4 kW, sometimes at the largest. And so I hope that that just helps to kind of translate to people the true impact of that. We are literally talking about a 15-year decrease in cost from $86,000 to $27,000 for what is now a better, more efficient technology as well. So I just didn't want that to get lost because I think it still amazes me when I see some of the old costs of systems that are in kind of the state records from that time. All right, so we'll jump back ahead here. Sorry for that, Matt, but looking at one of the incentives that still is available in a limited capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do see a question that came in, which was about sort of how the cost per watt of a residential system compares to a larger project like utility scale solar or solar farm. So the assumption, right, that the cost per watt is lower for the larger scale projects is correct, right? You have the economies of scale sort of scenario. So that is a significant driving factor in how new larger scale generation is being added to the grid right now. When you look at in 2024, 90%, over 90% of all new electricity generation capacity added to the grid came from clean resources like solar and battery storage and wind. And that is largely driven by the fact that when you start to compare all technologies across the board with one another, utility scale solar is consistently one of the cheapest costs of electricity generation available to utilities. So you are seeing economics being that primary driving factor on the utility scale side. And I will say, right, like given what I just outlined in terms of the challenges of significant new demand for electricity, coming online, I think we can't build projects, large projects, fast enough to meet that new demand. So, smaller projects like residential or commercial projects are an important tool in the toolkit for utilities when you start to look at it from an aggregated perspective, right? To start offsetting some of that demand.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then I think I do want to highlight just for a moment here, the ongoing battery incentive line there, speaking to the monthly bill credit that you can receive by participating in that sort of virtual power plant. That is not solely there for PowerPair customers. So for someone who's considering a project for next year, maybe capacity for PowerPair isn't available, and you want to participate in that portion of the program and get, up to $50, $92 a month even in the form of a monthly credit to your bill, that is still going to be available. And I think it'll be an important part of offsetting those battery costs moving forward. So jump into the next slide here. This is just to highlight that there are some resources available to be able to make sure you're aware of other incentives that are available. Sorry, I'm gonna have to cough here.
Yeah, I'll pick that up while Gabe is coughing. Yeah, there are some great tools and resources because the space changes very quickly, as we have just talked about with the reconciliation bill. Lots is changing at the state level and at the federal level, and so a great way to stay on top of, and also with utility programs that roll out every now and again. So great way to stay on top of all of these changes is through a variety of different resources and databases that I provided here, including the database of state incentives for renewables and efficiency, which is run by NC State University. There's a great website called Energy Funds for All. There's also Rewiring America, and then of course the utility is a great resource for programs that are available directly through them. And
Thanks for that, Matt. We'll see if I'll make it through here. Appreciate people bearing with me here. All right, so what does it mean moving forward? So it isn't too late to come out ahead, and this is just really what we want to emphasize is that now is still a smart time to go solar. Whether you've been thinking about solar for a while or you're just beginning to look into it, it really has never been a better time to look into it. To Matt's point, some state and utility-based incentives may still be available, so they won't necessarily always be. So definitely a great time to take advantage of those while they are. And lastly, or not lastly, but significantly, we want to highlight that, really since this suggestion came from the administration that these changes were going to happen, we've anticipated what that could mean for our industry and put an emphasis on aligning ourselves with the right manufacturers. We've adapted to reduce our equipment costs and to streamline our processes. And with utilities continuing to raise rates, it really isn't too late to come out ahead in 2026, even without a tax credit. So that's something we're excited about, looking at the economics moving forward and just continue to get better at how we can add value to the people we're working with. Moving forward, for anyone who's interested in solar for a business, whether it's your business or someone planning for commercial projects to be in construction at the appropriate times is going to be important. So talking to our team is a great way to start that off. Moving forward as well, it's going to be really interesting, as we look at the high demand that we have now and filling our calendar out. We have a lot of appetite at the beginning of the year to start taking projects on. And so as we're doing some of the work of making sure that we're aligned with those manufacturers, that we're reducing and streamlining our processes as much as we can, we encourage you to consider what the value could look like to be going solar in the early part of the year. And then lastly, again, just to kind of speak confidence into where we are, for many of you, you may not be aware that there was actually a state tax credit up until, what was it, 2015, Matt? And then that phased out, really kind of out of nowhere as well. And I think that just goes to show that these incentives, they really do come and go. Our industry is going to continue to adapt to change. And I think it's just a testament to how solar is here to stay. Across the country, as Matt spoke to, rates continue to rise, specifically here in North Carolina, where, I hate to tell everybody wants to live here. Whether it's North Carolina, South Carolina, we're two of the fastest growing states in the country. It's really difficult for utilities to keep up with that demand, let alone with the introduction of data centers and things of that nature. So we just have to expect that rates are going to continue to go up. And that also puts us at risk for more outages. I mean, we're here on the coast where hurricanes are a threat every year. We've got one out in the Atlantic right now that a system that people are keeping an eye on. But having the protection from those potential outages is important. But also not just for the outages we're aware of, which are hurricanes, but potential cyber attacks, heat waves. A big piece of this virtual power plant program that Duke has is making sure that they have available and accessible power to hit the grid when they need it most. When it's these heat waves like we had a month ago, or the cold snaps we get like when it snowed here in North Carolina, which doesn't happen very often. So those type of events are going to become increasingly difficult for the utility to meet that need. And it's going to be increasingly important for homeowners to be able to protect themselves. And with that all being said, we just continue to believe that when changes like this occur, it just forces more innovation and ingenuity. Solar remains one of the most effective ways to reduce your dependence on the grid, stabilize your long-term energy costs, and protect your home from outages. And we're confident that we're going to continue to get more efficient, better technology. And the price is one that is still of a ton of value in comparison to paying the increasing electricity costs and having nothing to show for it. All right. So with that being said, again, I want to say thank you, Matt, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. For anybody who has questions for Matt on anything that we talked about today, there's his contact. But we will go ahead and open it up now for some Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot them into the chat. And we will take a couple of minutes to address as many as we can. Let me go ahead and jump to the next slide here.
And while folks are adding additional questions, I see some questions that have already been dropped into the chat. I see Keith has asked a few here too. So I love the first point, Keith, about advocating for an incentive program directed towards current solar owners that want to add battery storage. I am in that camp. I moved into a new house about 8 months ago, and there was a smaller 3.3 kW system that was installed here without battery storage. And the first thing I thought when I got here was, oh man, wouldn't that be great if PowerPair was directly applicable to, some sort of retrofit program. I ended up deciding myself that I was going to move forward with installing a battery and utilizing the time that I have now, right, to be able to cash in on the 30% ITC, even without having a battery retrofit program. So I decided to move forward with that. But I will say that will be something that we will be very focused on at the General Assembly, because if my recollection serves me correctly, prior to the advent of the PowerPair program in North Carolina, you were looking at about 20,000 households that had installed residential solar. So there is a large, portion of the market here in North Carolina that does not have batteries already installed at their house. Especially, you look at numbers around what's called sort of the attachment rate, essentially the percentage of your projects that are installed with battery storage. The numbers, prior to the PowerPair were pretty low, and now post PowerPair, you're looking at 90+% of your projects now including battery storage. So there is a large section of the market here in North Carolina that doesn't yet have batteries but does have solar. So that I think will be a focus, at the commission and elsewhere moving forward. So I'm glad you elevated that, and it's something that I know a lot of advocates and a lot of organizations in the utility is also thinking about extensively.
You can put me in that camp as well, Matt. I had my system installed in 2023. And if I didn't plan to probably be out of this home in the next year or so, then I probably would have done the same thing you did. But it's the only thing I'll add there is that, while it's not in any way, shape, or form the same as that upfront cash incentive in the PowerPair program, the EnergyWise battery control program and the monthly credit from that is pretty substantial. I mean, if you're talking about the installation of one of your average home battery systems, getting about a $50 a month credit for up to 10 years, that does amount to six grand basically at the end of the day. So that's not insignificant over a 10-year period. And I think in many cases, it does help those numbers pencil out for sure. Cool. Let's see here. And so it looks like a couple other questions here. What's the estimated life of a battery system? Depending on the product, the warranties now on some of these products are as long as 15 years. So that's just the warranty period of the battery from the manufacturer. Obviously, in many cases, you can expect the useful life to be longer than that. But that's definitely an area of growth over the last several years. But 10 to 15 years is the warranty period. 15 to 20, I think, is a reasonable useful life to put on those products. Otherwise, again, I just want to thank Matt. Thanks so much for taking the time to join today. Really appreciate it. And for those of you who have hung out today, thank you again. If you're already a member of our community, thank you so much for continuing to tune in. And then if you are not, then we encourage you to reach out. We'd love to have a conversation. see what solar could look like for you, whether it's a good fit now or in the future. We just want to take people through that educational process. So go to capefearsolar.com, or you can call us at 910-409-5533. My email is just gabe@capefearsolarsystems.com, and I am always available to get back to you as soon as I can. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. Hope you have a great evening, and thanks again for tuning in. Bye-bye.